Charmaine Wilkinson's Black Cake, Heritage, Food, and Stories. I'm so thrilled that you have read this awesome novel. Charmaine Wilkinson's Black Cake, as of 2024, has made quite the debut, becoming a New York Times bestseller and a Hulu limited series. It also was chosen as a book club pick on the Today Show by Jenna Bush Hager in February 2022. It has garnered praise from many more organizations. In this presentation, I'll be discussing some important aspects and qualities of the book, hopefully without any spoilers. Indeed, this book, as a family saga and mystery novel, offers plenty of surprises and tantalizing subplots that make this book an amazing page-turner. While the television series provides some interesting comparisons to the book, my talk will focus mainly on the book. We will be discussing the roles of heritage, food, and stories within the novel. The slide above transcribes an interview where Wilkerson explains some of the inspiration behind Black Cake. I've highlighted some important aspects of her quote in the slide above. One more message I also take away from her quote is her multicultural family, as she describes, quote, where few of us had quite the same upbringing or even look alike, end quote. You can certainly see how this family gets replicated in the novel. Despite these similarities, we must remember that the book is not autobiographical, although she does concede that the Black Cake subplot was inspired by her mother. She tells Lee Nordstrom in an interview about her mother's Jamaican black cake and its recipe. Quote, she made a legendary rum cake or plum pudding, and that's what a lot of people call black cake in the Caribbean, end quote. Wilkerson continues and says, quote, a younger member of my family asked for the recipe several years ago, and I thought, well, I'm surprised that he would care and that he would think of it. And that started me thinking about the ways in which we inherit family identity through food. And it also had me thinking about the power of stories to shape our identities. Not only the stories that are told, but the stories that are not told, end quote. Wilkerson's statement that we inherit family identity through food indicates how food often provides the impetus to sit down and share stories. Stories that are familiar and often told within families, and the ones that are secretive and untold within the family. Upon inheriting her mother's fruitcake recipe, Wilkerson began to think about the heritage in new ways. She writes in the letter from the author in the back of the book, quote, that episode started me thinking about the cultural markers that people inherit and how we choose to hold some symbols closer to our hearts than others, especially in a multicultural family like mine, end quote. The cake, a byproduct of multicultural traditions and worldwide ingredients, in other words, sparked her craving to tell a story. Wilkerson also explains in the author's note, quote, it was my personal familiarity with a particular Caribbean food, black cake, that led obliquely to this book. It started me thinking about the emotional weight carried by recipes and other family markers that are handed down from one generation to the next. Then it had me writing about characters who must hold fast to their sense of self when they learn that their lives have been built on a dubious narrative, end quote. As the book repeatedly states, black cake in its recipe is a family tradition. But it plays an even more important role, as Benny explains, quote, because baking a black cake was like handling a relationship. The recipe on paper was simple enough. Its success depended on the quality of the ingredients, mostly on how well you handled them, on the timing of various processes, on how you responded to variables like the humidity in the air or the functioning of the oven thermostat, end quote. As Benny states, baking this cake reminds her of the relationship from her past. Looking at food from a more academic place, Marble, another key character in the novel, discusses the cross-cultural or multicultural nature of foods. Food culture, indeed, is understanding not only the traditions and ingredients, as Marble reminds the reader. It also depends on knowing how that food is produced in the past and who was sacrificed to make that food or commodity. Profoundly, Marble declares, quote, the diaspora of food, like the diaspora of people, has helped to shape many cultural traditions, end quote. A masterwork of different diasporas, Black Cake and its stories then bring to light narratives of Chinese Jamaican immigrants and families, young female West Indians in Britain, and second-generation Jamaican immigrants living in the United States. The book structure, to me, is one of its best qualities. Many of the chapters are very short, resembling something like flash fiction. Not only does that structure make reading the novel quick and entertaining, but it also helps to make readers see different sides and angles to the characters. Like a beautiful kaleidoscope, Black Cake's chapters explode with color and textures in front of our eyes. Wilkerson explains in the author's note, quote, "Despite the use of some historical and present-day context, this narrative focuses primarily on the emotional lives of the invented characters and is meant to be fable-like in its recounting of some of its main events." End quote. The fable-like quality of the book comes from Wilkerson's acumen to make complex, real characters, which each chapter develops as the book progresses. One example of this quality can be seen in the slide above. This brief chapter about Benny's past is marvelous. Benny, whose lighter skin and rich curly hair triggers the nice lady to pay her compliments and affection. Once Byron enters the scene, her sudden love turns to first confusion, then disdain, for she understands that Benny is an other, with a multi-racial background. Finally, this memory signifies the siblings' unflinching love and devotion to each other. Significantly, this brief chapter comes after Benny and Byron reconcile, reinforcing Wilkerson's message that they always have each other's back and love. The novel is populated with amazing characters: Eleanor in different forms and times, Bert in different forms and times, Bunny in different forms and times, Benny, Byron, Marble, Lynn, and Pearl are the most significant characters. Wilkerson explains her characterization process in the author's note, quote, "Most of the characters in Black Cake are people who do not quite fit into the boxes that others have set up for them. They struggle against stereotypes and the gulf between their interests and ambitions and the lives that other people expect them to lead, based on gender, culture, or class. Their difficulties are both universal and specific to the times and place in which they live." End quote. In the slide above, Eleanor's attorney, friend, and lover, Mitch, explains how everything influences a person's identity. One of the best ways to interpret and analyze the book is to focus on the key moments that define the character's development. You can look at how that character evolves and why he or she evolves throughout the novel. Another key aspect to note is that love conquers everything, including the memories from the islands. Indeed, Eleanor thinks, because the people you love were part of your identity too, perhaps the biggest part. End quote. Jamaica also could be seen as a profound character within the book too. With its plethora of chapters and characters, Black Cake ultimately is a masterpiece of storytelling. Stories make up the heart and soul of this novel, especially the stories of Jamaica. In the slide above, Pearl contemplates how the island never leaves people even as they move and disperse around the world. Being a part of a diaspora, these characters demonstrate an adage from the book, quote, "Everything is connected to everything else if you only go far enough back in time," said during a conversation between friends. I would like to end my discussion of Black Cake with a reminder from one of its key characters, Marble. Marble offers a fitting summary to keep in mind. She writes in her book, quote, "I don't believe that we can fully lay claim to a tradition if we are not willing to recognize what we have taken from other cultures over time, for better or worse." End quote. Black Cake operates on this philosophy in magical and effective ways. I hope you have enjoyed following along with its characters, stories, and traditions. Here are some sources to consider to learn more.